Just a quick disclaimer here for you guys. And now I would like to introduce our presenters for today. Our first presenter, Lauren Maddox, is the Senior Project Manager and co-leads capacity building activities for the MAST Center. She has worked in the healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood field for 13 years, developing and coordinating family strengthening programs, providing customized training and technical assistance to federal grantees, state and federal organizations, and collaborating with research firms on large-scale evaluations. She's a project manager at Public Strategies and brings a practitioner perspective to the project with expertise in development and implementation of outcome-oriented strategies for couples, individuals, and youth. Our next presenter, Mindy Scott, is a senior research scientist at Child Trends, a nonprofit research organization focused exclusively on improving the lives of children and youth. Dr. Scott conducts research on youth and adult healthy relationships, family formation, and fatherhood with a specific focus on supporting programs and policies for families. Our next presenter, Ryan Carlson, is an associate professor at the University of South Carolina and director of the Consortium for Family Strengthening Research. He is the evaluator of an impact evaluation for a current HMRE funded program, and Ryan also has previous experience programming and having served as a project director, workshop facilitator, and recruiter. And last but not least, Nicole Severio is a licensed mental health counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Florida. She's been working at the Marriage and Family Research Institute for 7 years, and for the last 2 years has served in the role of project director for Project Harmony. Nicole's favorite part of working at MFRI is seeing and hearing the impact that Project Harmony has on the families that attend her workshops. Her favorite hobbies include cooking, hiking, and reading. So welcome to all of our presenters, and I will turn it over to our first presenter for today, Mindy Scott.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everybody. I'm Mindy, and I want to welcome you all and start by just providing a bit of background about the Marriage Strengthening Research and Dissemination Center, or the MAST Center for short. The center is hosting today's webinar. And the MAST Center was established in 2018 by a 5-year cooperative agreement from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. And the center is made up of a team of national experts in marriage and relationship research and practice. The center is led by Child Trends in partnership with Public Strategies and also the National Center for Family and Marriage Research at Bowling Green State University. The MAST Center conducts research on marriage and romantic relationships and on the programs designed to strengthen those relationships, to work to help identify critical research gaps, generate new knowledge, and help programs more effectively serve the individuals and families that they work with. The MAST Center also focuses on mentoring and supporting emerging scholars, including students and early career professionals. And you can check out the MAST Center website. There's a link here on the slide, mastresearchcenter.org. There's information about the center, the team, and then also a number of research and capacity building publications and resources. Sorry, let me just get these slides advancing.
Mindy,
okay, here we go.
Oh, there it goes.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. So as part of our capacity building activities hosted by the MAST Center, Megan mentioned we're presenting a series of 3 webinars focused on researcher-practitioner relationships and conversations that can help build and support productive partnerships throughout program implementation and evaluation. Today's webinar is the 3rd in the series, and we'll be focusing on conversations related to dissemination of program evaluation findings. The first webinar focused on conversations during evaluation planning, and the second webinar focused on conversations between researchers and practitioners throughout the implementation process. And those first 2 webinars and recordings and slides are available at the MAST website. Again, that's mastresearchcenter.org. The purpose of this 3rd webinar is to identify conversations needed to ensure that dissemination is one aspect of your planning that can inform program delivery, as well as the larger research and practice fields. And we'll address critical components of dissemination planning Those components include communication goals and objectives, stakeholder engagement, data types and timing. So thinking about the data, the different types of data that are available and when those data are collected and then also reported out. Targeted audiences and tailored messages, various communication formats and media. And then you'll hear tips from the field shared by Nicole and Ryan. And the focus for our discussion today is really on the value of thinking about dissemination across all stages of program implementation and evaluation, including questions that can be considered even during the very early planning stages of evaluation to really set you on the path for the best dissemination plan that you can have from the beginning. We're thinking about the concept of dissemination as a very intentional process of identifying target audiences and tailoring communication messages and strategies to enhance awareness of and understanding of program evaluation findings. Dissemination is a key part of the research and program cycle. Unfortunately, it can sometimes get cut a little short because we tend to put it at the end of the cycle, and this could be the last task that you're working on just as time and money may be running out. But during today's webinar, we'll break down the different pieces of the definition of dissemination, like target audiences, tailored communication messages and strategies, and discuss the importance of researcher-practitioner discussions about these aspects of dissemination early in the process. The points that we'll raise about dissemination are very similar to ones that we've talked about already in webinars 1 and 2, around being clear about program goals, who the key stakeholders are in the work that you're doing, and how ultimately you want your evaluation results to be used. So we recognize that attendees may be in very different stages of program development, program implementation, evaluation, and then also dissemination. And these aspects of dissemination really will be relevant across all stages of your work. There are many different evaluation frameworks, and for this work, we're presenting from the point of view of a utilization-focused evaluation framework. This is a framework developed by Michael Quinn Patton. And this framework asks program evaluation teams to start at the end. So even at the earliest parts of planning, to think about what the evaluation goals are and ultimately how those evaluation findings will be used. Early planning can help ensure program goals, research methods, and then recommended actions that result from your research all align. And for federally funded healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood grantees, this really is an ideal time to be considering many of the questions we'll talk about today as you are establishing plans for your new grants and new programming. So folks who have attended the first 2 webinars will have heard the message around the importance of having an evaluation plan. And similar to that, it's also important to have a dissemination plan as part of that, and one that is documented and agreed on by your team. And the components of that plan reflect key decisions that researcher and practitioner partnerships need to make. Those include goals, who to involve in the evaluation and dissemination work, when to disseminate, so timing, which audiences will you develop products for, and how, and what kinds of products will you get out to the field for those different audiences. We've also noted in earlier webinars, as researchers and practitioners begin planning discussions, their different training experiences and goals may lead to some areas of tension or pain points, and those are important to discuss together and early on in the process. Here on this slide, we've listed the components of dissemination planning just mentioned, so thinking about goals, audience, partners, timing, etc. And have included some points about how researcher and practitioner perspectives compare within these categories. These are definitely broad points and may not be accurate or reflective of all partnerships, but in general, practitioners most likely are focused on using data from an evaluation to improve service delivery and are interested in accessing data early and frequently, while researchers are trained to think about advancing science in the broader field and may tend to wait until the end of an evaluation to access and use data and share findings. The level of product technical complexity may differ also because of different types of training or different needs of audiences. Practitioners may likely prioritize user-friendly products for service providers, while researchers are trained in more of an academic writing style that's not likely to be as user-friendly as some other ways to disseminate information. Practitioners may also be more used to accessing program evaluation findings through a number of different types of products and resources, while researchers tend to start with academic journals for dissemination, although many researchers also use a lot of other different formats. So let's get into detail about the why, the who, the when, the what, and the how of dissemination planning. So we'll start with the question, why do you need a dissemination plan? Disseminating findings can help meet many different goals, and the goals differ by the time points at which you share results and with whom you share results. Some examples of dissemination goals to think about are listed here on the slide, and they include to improve service delivery practices, whether that's internal to your own organization or with organizations with a shared mission, to advance knowledge in the broader field, to increase awareness and engagement of stakeholders, for example, by sharing results with partners and so that they can continue to be motivated and engaged in your work and support your work. Sharing results with past participants, but also to help attract future participants. Ensuring current or future funders have information about the importance and credibility of your work. And then also sharing results with those in power and the ability to make decisions and take action, such as policymakers. When thinking about dissemination goals, keep in mind the value of storytelling. Storytelling helps you connect to your audiences and share information in more meaningful ways. And it helps to take those facts, the data, the research that you have, but to communicate it in a way that is much more effective and engaging. And we have some quotes here from Dave Lieber, who is a columnist at the Dallas Morning News. And Mr. Lieber was a speaker at a conference for healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood grantees a couple summers ago. And he gave such an entertaining but also very informative and helpful talk about storytelling and how to incorporate storytelling into the work we do, both from a programmatic perspective and a research perspective. And so we just wanted to include some of his guidance here to help you think about how to bridge evaluation and storytelling. So one aspect that we've built into these webinars that's been really fun is to have the opportunity to hear from and learn from practitioner and researcher partnerships who are collaborating to conduct meaningful evaluations. So we've invited Nicole and Ryan today to talk with us and share their dissemination stories. So we have some conversation built into the webinar today, and we're going to start with two initial questions. So Nicole and Ryan, would you mind sharing with us your story of how you started your dissemination planning, and then what were some of your key dissemination goals?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mindy. So we started our dissemination planning fairly early. It was some point during the first year of grant funding, probably in the third or fourth quarters. I don't remember exactly. But the dissemination planning for us was ongoing, so it wasn't a one-time conversation. It was an ongoing conversation. We developed initial goals, but the goals that we developed changed as the grant progressed as well. And then when we had a better sense of the characteristics of the participants who were coming into the project, as well as what some of the outcomes were looking like. We're currently in the second quarter of a newly funded grant, which may be the case with some of the attendees. And so we're again in the process of dissemination planning. We're refining our evaluation plan and trying to make sure that it aligns specifically with our dissemination plan as well. When we think about what our key dissemination goals were in the previous project and are and will likely be in the current project, as Mindy was saying, publishing in peer-reviewed journals is important from an academic perspective and a scholarly perspective. But we look at more than just did the program work. We're interested in things like how did the program work? What process or implementation factors might have contributed to how the program worked? We also provide regular process evaluation updates to project partners in the community, which I think Nicole could share a little bit more about as well, but also project staff who are busy and engaged with doing the work on the front line. So they really value hearing kind of regular updates about the evaluation. We also thought about ways to engage other collaborators or other researchers who, so that they could kind of take a look at our data and provide their expertise and view it through their lens to help us think about how we could present our data in novel ways as well. Nicole, anything you want to add or thoughts you have about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize what you already shared, Ryan, about this aspect of considering community partners and staff as key stakeholders when it comes to dissemination, because from the practitioner standpoint or the implementation standpoint, it was a really big benefit to us. So for the staff to be in the know, right, of some of the process outcomes that Ryan is talking about, like which recruitment sites are giving us the people that are most likely to complete the program, or which events have the lowest attendance, right, compared to other ones, and that we have to really focus on some case management and trying to beef up the retention for those events, really helps our staff do their day-to-day work better, but also feel more connected to kind of the mission of the organization and to the big picture, and so that really helps. And then kind of similarly with our partners, right? Our partners are collaborating with us day in and day out. And so for them to know, like, you're sending referrals over to us, this is what's happening with the people that come through, and these are some of the benefits that your referrals are really resulting in, was helpful for that continued engagement.
Thank you. That's all so helpful to hear sort of that real life experience. And definitely spoke to some of the things we've been sharing just around the importance of ongoing conversations, the need to revisit and refine your questions and dissemination goals as you sort of see how things are unfolding, and certainly different types of partners and stakeholders, and how you can access data and information sooner rather than later for some of those stakeholders, and then sort of how to take all of that information at the end of an evaluation as well. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, and Lauren, we're going to move on to the next question around who to involve in dissemination planning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mindy. Before I dive into partner engagement, I just wanted to remind participants, if questions do come up throughout the presentation, we welcome you to type those into the chat box. We will have some time dedicated at the end of this presentation for Q&A. So as you think of those questions, go ahead and type those in there, and we will make sure to revisit those at the end. So in terms of partner engagement, creating a dissemination plan involves a collaborative effort between partners and programs to identify the best ways to share knowledge for project's purpose and target audience. Key stakeholders and partners should be considered, consulted, and written into your dissemination plan to ensure the research findings are distributed and understood by those who need it most. Additionally, you want to make the best use of your available resources. So including partners in dissemination gives you the added benefit of involving individuals from more than one organization, allowing access to a diversity of skills and networks. Partners may have access to an array of resources as well. So for example, partner organizations may be able to share research at community meetings or conferences, or university partners may be able to use external relation channels to publicize the project. Included on this slide are a couple of questions to think about when assessing which partners should be included in your plan. So ask yourself, which trusted partner can provide feedback on communication messages and products? What other organizations share your goals and could contribute to dissemination? Who are the champions and key knowledge brokers who can help you distribute your dissemination products to have impact? So as we mentioned earlier, dissemination should be considered from the beginning of your project. Planning how the research will be shared can help guide the research process and maintain focus on the project's ultimate goals. And depending on the nature of the research, some information may be communicated before the entire project is completed. So for example, news releases may be sent out at various stages of the project to generate interest and update the public on what is happening. On this slide, we depict a data dissemination lifecycle and highlight how data can be used and disseminated based on what stage your project is in. So let's start at the top with continuous quality improvement. So monitoring data for continuous quality improvement is important and can be used to reveal whether a project and activity implementation is on track and whether expected results are being achieved. So Ryan and Nicole mentioned this earlier, sharing information and data with project staff is really important, and that's a part of that continuous quality improvement. So performance monitoring reports should be generated on a regular basis throughout the life of the project and shared with decision makers to improve program performance. So now we'll go to process evaluation. This is also known as implementation evaluation and refers to collected data collected about service delivery and client participation. So these data includes things like how many curriculum sessions were delivered, how many people came to a session, how many participants completed the full curriculum, what was the average number of curriculum sessions participants completed, and so on. These data can be used to monitor implementation characteristics like attendance, dosage, and completion. So with short-term outcome evaluation, we need to identify indicators that the program shows intended effects. With programs like relationship education, it can take some time to work or to show that it is working. Generally, attitudes and beliefs change before behavior. So when we assess short-term outcomes, we look at things that are likely to change quicker, like beliefs about commitment or attitude towards parenting. Later in the program, the expectation is that these changes in beliefs and attitudes will lead to changes in actual relationship-oriented behaviors. So we look for what we call intermediate or long-term outcomes. For example, in relationship education, these would be things like communication skills, conflict management, and relationship stability. All right, so now we're going to turn back to Ryan and Nicole and ask a few more questions. So Ryan and Nicole, what partners have you involved in planning and disseminating program evaluation results? And at what points in the data collection process did you focus on dissemination? And how did the communication messages vary by purpose or timing?
Yeah, so our partners, some of them are kind of unique to our setting, both being a university researcher as the evaluator, but also a university implementation site. So key partners for us included other researchers, but they also included students across academic levels, so undergraduate and graduate students. Also community partners and project staff, as we mentioned before. We included project staff because of the unique perspective they have with their on-the-ground experience in implementing the project. We began focusing on process dissemination early. So some of the early process dissemination included presenting information to staff about recruitment and enrollment data. And then we also conducted yearly presentations to community partners on some of the same type of data, and as well as the characteristics of people who were coming into the program. And then we also presented generally the project as a whole at professional conferences during the first 2 years of the project. And so then we transitioned to analyzing preliminary data, which I think is really important to emphasize that it was preliminary. So just looking at early results, presenting that information to project partners as well, which allowed us to have discussion and then make any adjustments as needed. And we also presented some of those preliminary results at professional meetings because folks can provide helpful feedback there as well. And then finally, we focused on peer-reviewed publications of evaluation outcomes. And then we also put together different infographic documents that could be shared widely that are in kind of less of a technical format. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind is although that project is finished, we're still working on different aspects of data analysis and data dissemination to look at different evaluation factors in more unique ways. So the process of evaluation and dissemination doesn't end just because the funding for a particular project ends either. Nicole, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I wanted to add a little bit about the community partners and how kind of it worked for us to really involve them in that process. And I just wanted to highlight that for us, it was really helpful to include both formal and informal community partners. So there's ones that you have established MOUs with and service agreements, and those are really important to include, but there's also community partners and organizations that you work with, maybe on a more informal level, that could also benefit from kind of knowing some of the results and preliminary outcomes and just data from your program for multiple reasons. And so one of the really specific ways that we tried to do that within Project Harmony was by being really strategic about planning basically an avenue of communication between the evaluation of Ryan's team and then the community partners. And so we did that by hosting these partner breakfasts on a yearly basis, and we would plan the evaluation visits at the same time as the breakfast. And so Ryan would have a space to be able to present some of these findings. And we thought that was really helpful. We got a lot of positive feedback from those breakfasts. So I just wanted to give like a specific example of how we did that. And then I would add that there's maybe things that we could have added that I've seen other people be successful with, like newsletters and other mediums of kind of disseminating some of the information on a more regular basis that I think could be beneficial as well.
That's great. Thank you both. I have a quick follow-up question. You both mentioned kind of engaging partners throughout the life cycle of the project, not just at the end, and I think that's kind of been a theme we've been talking about throughout. But did you find that helped with that kind of end game, or when you got some of those results after the project had finished in disseminating them? Did that help them to stay more engaged with the program throughout? I'll leave it at that and let you guys answer.
I would say yes, because it's almost like you got a buy-in, and I don't know if you would agree, Ryan. So there's an activity that partners are usually doing for you, right, which sometimes is in the form of referrals, sometimes it's a service that they provide on behalf of the program. And so if they know that the program is working or that there's a benefit to them, right, like sometimes we would focus on this is what the needs that our participants come in with, and so that means that we're referring them back to you for the needs that really align with your organization. And so it really helps that kind of like community approach and feeling like we're all working together for the betterment of the community, increasing that buy-in.
I think that's such a great point, Nicole. The idea that the services that are being implemented as part of the Relationship Ed program and how those services sort of parallel and add to the mission of those program partners. And when they can see some of the both process and outcome evaluation results, when they are an audience for dissemination, it can help reinforce some of that buy-in. The other thing we did that I forgot to mention is that we did formal focus groups with our community partners to solicit specific information from them about how the referral process was going, what their perspective was on the project, and their perspective on from their point of view how participants were doing who were attending the programming.
That's great. Thank you both very much. We'll check in with you here in just a few minutes again. So now we want to talk a little bit more about audience. So who is your intended audience or your target audience, and who might that include? It is important to define who we want to disseminate information to first, and then create strategy and message that will connect to them. So start by asking and answering these questions. Who will benefit from your evaluation results and why? How can your audience use these findings? Who has the influence and resources to turn your results into action? And what characteristics of your target dissemination audience influence how you might tailor and deliver your product? Now that you have thought about and defined your audience, let's think about what characteristics of your audience might influence how we tailor and deliver our products. So the first consideration is around communication. So ultimately, we know that research dissemination is communication, and different audiences require different approaches. So good communication considers the practical needs, cultural factors, language, terminology, preferences of the audience. Also, to properly tailor your findings and message, you must consider your audience's age, profession, education level, location, beliefs, values, and interests. To help narrow down how you will disseminate your findings based on the audience, write down the list of audiences you identified, and then consider creating a profile for each audience. So similar to creating a profile for your ideal participant when you're doing recruitment for your program, you want to do this as well for the audiences you intend to disseminate your information to. So look at the factors listed on this slide and define the characteristics that apply to your identified audience. Brainstorm other factors with project staff that define your audiences and make sure to include those as well. Next, you want to begin crafting your messages. To begin, sit down with your project staff and prioritize the types of changes you would like to bring about. Then focus your message with that in mind. To do that, you will need to help your audience hone in on key communication messages. Consider asking these questions. What problem are you trying to address? This question is helping you to narrow your message. Your evaluation may address several areas, perhaps divorce prevention, child abuse, intimate partner violence, and/or partner commitment. It is recommended that you narrow a brief communication message around one or two issues. If you try to communicate too much, the impact of the message will be diluted. For the question, what potential impact could this knowledge have on the field? Think about how you would want to craft and distribute your messages so that it provides clear recommendations. For example, if a healthy marriage program finds that a specific sequencing of activities is pivotal to impact, they will want to create messages that give proper weight and attention to that finding and distribute it to the appropriate audiences to, in turn, build capacity in the healthy marriage field. So another thing to consider and include in your dissemination strategy is how your audience prefers to receive information. So here in a few slides, we will discuss more about how to package your products together and choose the best mediums to disseminate your research. But for now, we are going to turn back to Ryan and Nicole and ask a few more questions. All right, Ryan and Nicole, how have you identified key audiences, and in what ways have you tailored your program evaluation dissemination products to key audiences?
I think in identifying key audiences, a lot of what you were mentioning, Lauren, is important, which has to do with what's the purpose of the project and what is the goal of our dissemination. And so, as a researcher, of course, one of our goals is to advance family science. However, we're also very interested in about sustaining these efforts. So we view sustainability as a primary motivator for dissemination. And so when we think about our audiences or key audiences, we think about people who have a vested interest in sustainability of these types of programs. So it could be folks in academia, certainly policymakers, certainly practitioners as well, and folks in the community. But we think about people who are interested in what we did, how we did it, and in what ways it worked. So our dissemination efforts have been tailored based on some of those audiences. So for example, we created kind of an infographic document that can be that talks about a summary of our findings, more vaguely, much less technical, and can be distributed more widely on social media platforms or shared with various networking groups. Then we think about professional conferences. One of the, I think, really great things about the HMRE funding and the relationship education field is that it's a very interdisciplinary field. And so we have professionals who represent diverse backgrounds who can then take this information back to their kind of professional homes to disseminate there as well. And of course, informal presentations. We're obviously very interested in peer-reviewed journals that would be more geared towards people in academia or researchers, and technical reports as well, which are generally required with a formal evaluation and then are submitted to the funder, which can often then be used for future policy implications. But as one of the things Nicole mentioned earlier, things we haven't done are press releases, blog posts, or newsletters. I think all of those are important dissemination avenues as well.
Yeah, I'm even thinking about how video has become so prominent, such a quick way of consuming information. People seem to prefer it and be able to to consume the information a little bit more effectively. And so it seems like there's an innumerable way of being really creative and as to how you maybe modify the presentation of your findings so that the target audience can really take it into account and benefit from it. So I think we took advantage of a lot of the different ways, and it seems like there's even more that to consider for the future and for this newer grant that we're on. Something else I wanted to mention that maybe I don't think we have talked about it yet, but the idea of considering staff as a key audience as well, I think it's important to consider how their buy-in and their knowledge of some of the dissemination and some of the information from the outcomes could really help with the sustainability in terms of recruitment and maintenance of really good quality staff. So how do you get people that are really passionate about the mission over the organization? I think that's people who know that the program is special because the program works, and they know that it works because they have access to some of the outcomes and some of the results that come from the evaluation. So I think that was helpful for us as well.
Those are all great key points. Thank you guys very much. I am going to turn it back over to Mindy now, and she is actually going to talk to us a little bit more about how particular audiences may like to receive information. Mindy?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So we have already started talking about tailoring dissemination products to select audiences. And so there are a number of different questions you could consider when planning for the how your audience likes to receive information. For example, consider where your audience turns to for credible information. What types of products would they most likely engage with? What trusted organizations frequently interact with your audience, and those organizations can help serve as intermediaries between you and your target audiences. And then also thinking about the different types of media that target audiences use to access information. Some examples, just thinking about TV, Twitter, video that Nicole mentioned, different websites, print media, and then also thinking about written products. So we've been talking a little bit about some examples, and these types of written products and materials can take many different forms. And so here again, just conversations and thinking about what formats will work best for what audiences, thinking about a potential combination of products that might be needed to reach your dissemination goals, especially if there are different types of goals that you have as part of your plan. And we'll look at some examples of products that have been published by Public Strategies, Child Trends, Ryan and Nicole's work, but some of the formats that have been mentioned already and are listed here include fact sheets, briefs, web content, infographics. Social media is a great way to communicate really brief pieces of information and get attention to your work, and then also press releases. I want to first, though, before we look at some of those examples, just put all of the pieces from today's discussion together for you. So we've discussed a number of important questions to consider when thinking through the why, who, when, what, and how of dissemination planning. And you can really apply these questions to each type of dissemination activity that you have in mind. And each of those activities will help you meet a different dissemination goal. So just to kind of walk through an example, the first example in this table, there's a practitioner brief. And so these may be developed with a specific goal of sharing implementation information with other grantees or practitioners. So that's the why and the who. And that information could be made available early on in your project in terms of timing, and could include tips on curriculum tailoring, for example, sort of thinking about those key communication messages that would be most useful to communicate in a brief type publication. And then how are the best ways to disseminate that brief? Through your website, through other websites, through partner networks, through a newsletter, for example. And we've listed a few other types of dissemination activities here: webinars, peer-reviewed publication, blogs. There's so many different types of activities to consider, but each one would have slightly different goals, slightly different audiences, different timing, different messaging, and then also different dissemination channels. So it's a really valuable exercise to kind of walk through what you're hoping to communicate and to what audiences and how to best share that information. And then just to wrap up, here are these examples we wanted to show, just some different types of evaluation dissemination products. You can get a sense of the range of activities and products that are possible. Here in the slide, there's work. These reflect work by Public Strategies and colleagues on a project related to addressing self-regulation among youth in healthy relationship programs. And the information has been disseminated through a technical report, through a practitioner guide, a measurement tool, short fact sheet. So there's really a range of materials that have been put out and really vary in terms of technical complexity, the length, and the detail that's included. Here we have an example of one of those, the infographics that Ryan mentioned from the Project Harmony evaluation. Really nicely visual and concise information about the evaluation and findings. And then just another example from Child Trends. This is work with our program partners at Promundo and ways to highlight evaluation results from an evaluation conducted on an adolescent pregnancy prevention program for young men. And for this project so far, Child Trends and Promundo have published the findings through a report, a blog, a webinar, and web text, which is something that many organizations and evaluators are moving toward, rather than having sort of a downloadable printable product, having a nicely designed web text to publish information. So just a few more examples of what some of the options are. So we are through our presentation and discussion. Thanks so much for joining, and we have time for some questions and answers with the audience, and so Lauren's going to help facilitate that.
Thank you, Mindy. Yeah, so once again, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us today. If any questions have come up throughout the presentation, we would love to hear from you and love to pose those questions to our presenter panel. Go ahead and type those into the chat box if you'd like to ask those questions of our panel today. I did have one question that came in that I'll pose to Ryan and Nicole. In the absence of a formal evaluation, how can programs use data to disseminate about their program?
I think this is a great question. Not every grantee or community program is going to have a formal evaluation. If there is a federally funded grantee that doesn't have a formal evaluation or a contract with an evaluator, there's a lot of data that's available through the NFORM database that the feds are having grantees use. And so while there are certainly some considerations surrounding dissemination and institutional review board or IRB approval that folks might need to take into account, there are opportunities to think about ways that data could be used to promote the types of services that are being provided through the organization, or even data that could just maybe in a very non-scientific way demonstrate how people are improving. For example, if there's some type of a satisfaction questionnaire that can be provided to participants before they finish services, then programmers can report on the percent of people who were satisfied with the types of services that they received, or the percent of people who are interested in maybe referring somebody to the services that they received. So I think those are all strategies. And of course, if a program has a partnership or is located near a university, oftentimes there are graduate students and maybe even junior faculty who might be interested in providing the service of evaluation at no cost. A student could use the data for class purposes, but at the same time present those findings to the organization, just to help demonstrate some of the effectiveness, again, even if in a non-scientific manner.
I think that's great, Ryan. Nicole, did you have some thoughts as well?
Yeah, I wanted to add too that there are some pieces of data that we always rely on the evaluation to get. Like there's some things that you might be naturally collecting in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that that really helps us in the implementation of the program. Like we would look at, for example, recruitment based on each individual recruiter. So if somebody was doing really well, we wanted to know what strategies were you using that really helped like your numbers increase for the month, and how can the other recruiters kind of learn from that, let's say, as an example. So there were things that we kept internally that really helped with the CQI process, I think that was mentioned before, that we just relied on. Sometimes it's just there available in your day-to-day data collection that you're doing just a function, right? So that was something that was helpful.
I think that's great. And Ryan, when you were talking earlier about some of those data points about, satisfaction surveys, I think that kind of ties in too with your sustainability focus. You know, when you're trying to engage new partners or new funders, using some of those data points, even outside of a formal evaluation, I think can be really impactful and can maybe entice some new partners to come on board to then sustain the programming.
Yeah, absolutely.
We did have another question come in from Heather. She asked, if an agency doesn't really know what kind of data they want evaluated or disseminated, what are some of the basics that you start with?
I think this is a great question because often this can be the case. So I think it's helpful to start with asking the agency, what do they see as what do they see as the primary goal of the services that they're providing? So if they were successful, what would be some indicators of that success? Is it that in relationship education, we're focused on a few key general things like improving the quality of participants' relationships, or maybe improving stability of relationships. But if it's a community agency that also provides broader services, they might be interested in helping their clients to obtain more services in the community or greater resources in the community. That might be an overall goal. Maybe it's a job training organization. So I would start with what is their mission and the goal of the organization, and then when it comes down to a specific service that they're providing, how would they describe that, even if in an informal way, how would they describe the success of that service? And then from an evaluation perspective, we might be able to think of creative strategies to actually measure that success. And it's possible some organizations are already collecting data that might indicate, that can be used to indicate success, but it just hasn't been looked at in that way. So that could be the case as well.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan. I did see one other question come in. How many dissemination products would you release per year? Is there a standard? Is it, can you ever release too many, or what is your recommendation?
Well, I hear that question from the lens of someone in academia who is part of my job is to disseminate, is to publish. And so there is not a limitation on that particular number. So at the same time, I think that it's important to have realistic expectations in terms of what dissemination might look like. Too much too soon could mean that the data that's being disseminated isn't complete. It's not full. It's not accurate. It could be overwhelming to people. So I think it is important to have some strategic conversations with team members about what it is we want to disseminate and when. And sometimes, particularly as it relates to outcome data, it takes a while for that data to start coming in and to make sure that that data is accurate and that it's quality data. So that's going to take a little bit longer. Process type data on participant characteristics and the types of services that are being provided, the number of people that are being served, those types of things, I think you could think about quarterly benchmarks, yearly benchmarks, things of that nature that kind of have some clean cut points. But I'm not sure. I've never really heard of a set number outside of that. I don't know if others have a perspective on that.
That makes sense. I think I was thinking about it in terms, too, of what we talked about earlier, identifying the audience, how do they like to receive information, taking time to come up with a package of products that is going to reach that audience, and then figuring out a timeline for release. If you release it all at once, are things going to get lost in the mix? But when does it make sense to release this? And even looking at the current environment and what's going on and when it might make sense to release a certain product with a certain message versus another one.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is all of the questions that I'm seeing come in. to Q&A, of course, you know, if you think of something else, feel free to type that in there. I would like to just say thank you to everybody today for attending this webinar presentation. We hope that you enjoyed the information shared. We will be posting this recording of the webinar on the MAST website, so make sure to visit mastresearchcenter.org, and that is posted there on the slide. You can also access additional briefs and resources at mastresearchcenter.org, including the recently released brief, An Introduction to Program Design and Implementation Characteristics of Federally Funded Healthy Marriage and Relationship Education Grantees. I would like to say thank you to my fellow presenters, as well as our practitioner evaluator team. Ryan and Nicole, thank you for sharing your experiences today, and of course for all of those great lessons learned along the way. You are so valuable to this presentation, and we really appreciate you being a part of it. Lastly, if you would like a copy of these PowerPoint slides, you can email me at lauren.maddox@publicstrategies.com. My email, again, is posted there on the slide. And thank you again for attending today's webinar, and we look forward to engaging with you at future MAST events. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.